season starts here, the Vancouver Boat Show.
Oh, bright lights now.
Welcome to the Vancouver International Boat Show virtual seminar series, sponsored by Freedom Marine International Yacht Sales, the premier choice for exploring the passion of yachting. Thank you for joining us. The seminar will begin in one moment. If you are having technical difficulties, you can reach me, the online moderator, via the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Questions for our speakers can be added in the Q&A box, also at the bottom of your screen, and questions will be answered after their slide presentation. It is our pleasure to present Anchoring Techniques from Puget Sound to Worldwide Regions with John Neal and Amanda Swan Neal. Over to you, John and Amanda.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Maureen.
Well, welcome everybody, wherever you are in the big blue planet. I wish I was here, but I'm not. Diving to check our anchor. How brilliant is that?
That sounds warmer than
here.
than here.
Well, this is our favorite anchorage. It's called Sally Hamner, and it is just below 80 degrees north on the island of Svalbard.
600 miles from the North Pole, and this is a Russian polar bear hunter's hut that is 200 years old. The tar paper is added, that's newer. The rifle on my shoulder is because there are polar bears everywhere in Svalbard, and they are hungry.
Well, who are you?
Who are,
We're supposed to introduce ourselves.
Oh, I
So
was
I'm
introducing
Amanda.
the, I'd rather introduce a polar bear. Oh, right, okay. Yeah, I'm John Neal, and I sailed away from Victoria when I was 22 years old on an Alban Vega in 1974 and wrote a book that became a bestseller called Log of Mahina. Our boat, Mahina TRI-3, is anchored in the background, and this is a very challenging anchorage because of the kelp.
I'm Amanda, and I sailed to Victoria when I was 16. Yes, coming up from San Francisco on a boat that I built with my parents. We sailed the South Seas and on to Hawaii, San Francisco, and then on to Canada. Our visas ran out for the States.
Okay, so this is number 2 out of 4 Vancouver Boat Show seminars. Tomorrow afternoon, we'll be presenting storm survival tactics, and on Saturday, diesel engine essentials. These programs will be posted for 6 months.
I think so. It's quite a while.
Quite a while. So
Yep.
If you don't get a chance to see them all today or tomorrow, you can always look at them later. This is excerpted from a 3-day virtual offshore cruising seminar that we'll be doing in April. First time we've ever done a 3-day seminar. We're working on filming it now, and it has an accompanying 260-page offshore cruising companion that details everything we'll be covering, and you can sign up online for that at mahina.com. Our whole deal is helping you realize your cruising adventure. So if you want to cruise to Hawaii, to Mexico, around the world, whatever, our job is to help you realize that dream. It's a pretty exciting job. The boat that we have been sailing since we had it built in 1996 is the Hallberg Grassy 46 Mahina TRI-3. And we're just in the process of selling her now. And the boat that we'll be using this summer and for the coming summers is a Garcia Exploration 45 based at San Juan Sailing in Bellingham.
And what are we using it for?
Oh, we're using her to teach you guys how to sail your own boats around the world. So we do 9-day sail training programs. Next year, we're doing a very exciting program in Scotland. We're doing 4 9-day expeditions all the way up to the Shetland Islands. And then we'll be flying from the Shetlands to Alaska and be bringing the Garcia down from Alaska through BC waters, down the west coast of Vancouver Island. And it's going to be a very exciting year. We have handouts for all the seminars that we present. If you've come to the Vancouver Boat Show before, you know that. And so those handouts for all of our seminars are available free, mahina.com/forums. And so if you can multitask, you could go and quickly download the anchoring techniques forum That would be really helpful to you. We're going to go through 8 points.
Starting with the anchoring equipment and finishing with anchoring equipment that you don't really need. But what you do need is a strong back. If you've got
Well, if you got a manual
you've got a
windlass.
manual windlass, or for good muscles, you don't have to. Yeah, I think
This woman's about 30 years old, and she has a much stronger back than most of us who are a bit older. We're going to talk about anchor types, and I've divided these up. I've come up with these names or these categories into scoop, ballasted chisel, claw, fluke, and vintage. Vintage, that's like me. So one of the most interesting chaps that we've met cruising, we met him up in the Shetland, across from Norway, Shetland Islands, and that was Peter Smith. He's the inventor of the Rockna, and the Vulcan anchors, which without any question are the most popular cruising anchors in the world at this time. He's a Kiwi, and we gave him a really hard time. We'll talk more about that later. So here's what he invented, and this was actually built in Vancouver before they shipped it off to China to be built. And it's a very effective anchor, but it has a problem. It's got this crazy roll bar in the front, so it's very difficult on many bows to secure that anchor in the anchor roller and without cutting and welding. And so Peter Smith came up with an option called the Vulcan, which is, I think, a ballasted chisel. That's how I describe it. And that's very similar to the Rockna, but doesn't have the crazy roll bar. Mantis is another good anchor. It has mechanical fastening, so it bolts together, which we're not totally wild about. This is the anchor that we have chosen, and it's worked fabulously well. It's called an Ultra. It's only available in stainless steel, and it absolutely never drags. It's probably the best anchor out there from what Nigel Calder says. And after using CQR anchors for about 43 years, this is in Sweden, switching from the old CQR to the new shiny Ultra anchor on the bow roller. Another good anchor is the Delta. We use that for our second anchor. And then the Claw or Bruce anchor is there on the right side. And these are just other options.
What size anchor would you recommend?
Well, the ideal is to go one size larger than the diagram shows for your size and weight of boat. And so this is a 50-foot boat, and they're using an 85-pound Delta for a standard, 45-pound Bruce for a second. We use a 77-pound Ultra for the standard and a 45-pound, 44-pound Delta for the second anchor. So just one size larger than what's specified. The gold standard is being able to carry 2 anchors on bow rollers. You don't necessarily need windlasses for each, that would be really heavy, but having both anchors on the bow ready to go so you can easily and quickly deploy the second anchor is really excellent. We didn't have this on our last boat, and it was a hassle to get it out of the lazarette, get the chain, put it all together, and deploy the second anchor. Danforth anchors were designed for the Catalina flying boats for the US Navy in World War II. They do great in sand and mud. They're almost unbeatable in those conditions, but they do lousy in rock and coral and grass, eelgrass and kelp. There is a development of a Danforth anchor called a Fortress. And so it's an aluminum version of the Danforth, but the problem is aluminum is really malleable. And so if you look at the Fortress anchor on the bow of this boat in Hawaii, you can see that one of the bars is broken off. The tip has been bent from anchoring in coral, and the anchor is basically worthless. These owners were on their 5th Fortress anchor. They kept taking it back to West Spring because it's guaranteed and getting another one. I think they should have just gotten a galvanized steel anchor instead, but anyway.
How often do we unfriend our chain?
Well, it really depends. In Northwest waters,
yeah.
Never, because it doesn't abrade very often. But if we're in coral waters, usually every 1 to 2 seasons, infrared it, because the chain tends to chafe, get the galvanizing chafed off at the same point. So if you infrared it, it really extends the life of it. And then you'll need to get the chain and anchors regalvanized if you're anchoring in coral waters every 3 years or so. It's difficult because there are few places around the world that can handle galvanizing chain. It takes a special spinner, like a giant clothes dryer, and not many places have that. So Sometimes people end up replacing chain, and that's more expensive than galvanizing it. If you really have a big budget, bigger than ours, you can get stainless steel chain. It costs 7 times as much as galvanized chain. So,
I thought the links were smaller in stainless steel chain. Do they still go around the windlass?
yeah, they
Okay.
come in different pitches, but
All right.
still work.
So do you need to test the chain that it goes around the windlass at
You
all?
do, and so it's not a bad idea if you're getting a new type of chain to buy a foot
Uh-huh.
or half a meter and just try that on your Gypsy Wildcat and make sure it actually
Fits.
engages. So marking your chain, there's a lot of different theories on this. We've seen some real exotic things, but the best we've found are Ancor colored cable ties or wire ties or zip ties, whatever you want to call them. West Marine sells them. Stevenson Marine in Vancouver, I'm sure, sells them, but they're just really simple. And don't clip the tails off, leave them long. There's also chain markers, but these are really hard to see if there's mud. And if you're anchoring in BC coastal waters, there's lots of mud. Having a legend so that anyone who's deploying the anchor can easily see it. We just post this inside the anchor locker door. So you can just quickly look at it and say, oh, we've got 2 red wire ties, must be at 100 feet. The bitter end or the inboard end of the chain must be secured to the boat, shackled to the boat in a really strong manner in case you need to ditch the chain in a hurry.
But you also need a rope strap. So you can see there's a rope strap between the shackle and the chain. That can come up on deck. You can then cut the anchor line away if you need to leave in a hurry and don't have time to pull in all your chain, or your windlass isn't working and you can't get your chain in.
So it's general program in tropical coral waters to have all chain on the primary road. How much do you need? Well, minimum would be 30, no, not 30 meters. 15 meters would be the minimum to have. We have 80 meters on our primary anchor, and that's absolutely more than enough 99% of the time. The second anchor and road setup rarely will be all chain. Island Packets and maybe Amels are about the only boats in the world that are set up for 2 all chain roads. So usually the second anchor will be 1 boat length of chain, so 30 to 50 feet of chain, and then the rest nylon road. You really have 2 good options for the nylon. 3-strand nylon line, which is the most common, which is shown on the left side of this image, has very good chafe resistance, but it doesn't coil very nicely. If you have more than 20 meters, you have to coil it in a figure 8 and then tie it. Otherwise, it just gets knots in it, kinks in it, and you lose half the strength of the chain. The absolute best option is multi-plat or mega braid, and that's on the right side. This is a 12-strand coreless nylon line. It's not too difficult to splice, and it's very stretchy. It doesn't have quite as good chafe resistance, but you can just stuff it all into a bag like we're doing here with this duffel bag. So it's really easy. It's more expensive. This piece of 100 meters of 3/4 inch multi-plat costs about $2,000 Canadian. So it's expensive line.
But it has lots of uses. We use it for
Absolutely.
towing a drogue. We'll run this as our stern line of shorts you'll see later in this image. It's
Storm
our towing
anchor.
line. It's really nice to have that one long piece of line.
So we recommend you have 2 lines on board. One that's about 50 meters, that would be the 3-strand, and one that is about 80 meters.
Yeah, it's long.
80 or 90, 100, actually that's 100 meters. 100 meters long, so that for emergency uses.
You can mark your line. They sort of
fall
does.
off.
They fall off.
But
Generally, you can
they work
see
for a while.
by the how much line is there. But if you are using mainly all road and anchoring a lot, it's kind of nice to have these markers put in.
In coastal waters where you don't have coral, it's totally fine to use a boat length of chain and the rest nylon. But the difficulty is in stowing it. The nice thing about chain is it self-stows well, especially if you have a deep chain locker. It just comes down. Sometimes you have to flake it, but it just sits there nicely and goes out. And if you have nylon line and you just jam it all down, it's amazing how tangled it can become. Now you want to use stainless steel for the connection parts between the chain and the anchor. And so this is a Wichard, W-I-C-H-A-R-D, a French investment cast stainless steel bow shackle that is brilliant. It costs 3 times as much as the Chinese ones, but your boat is worth it, believe me. You notice that we are seizing or mousing that shackle, even though it has 90-degree detents in the shoulder of the shackle pin. We don't want any chance of vibration causing it to back out, and then we lose the anchor. I've done that once. Well, for windlasses, that's another important part of the gear scenario. We have options between vertical and horizontal, manual and electric. Now, if your boat's over about 35 feet, 12 meters, you're going to want to think about electric windlass, unless you're young. If you're 20, 25 years old, manual windlass is fine, as long as you have a strong back. This is a horizontal stainless steel windlass, and this is on Nigel Calder's boat. It's a lighthouse, and it has the manual place to insert a wind channel right on the top of it. It's made in Los Angeles, and Nigel swears by them. This is on the charter boat that we used last summer for sail training. It was a Jeanneau 45.1, and it was nice that the horizontal windlass was hidden away in the anchor locker. It got a lot less saltwater spray on it being hidden down there. It meant the deck was clear, and it worked fine.
And all that mud too got trapped. It wasn't coming right across the deck and being washed down. You see there's a little anchor well there, and the chain would come around the gypsy and drop down. You've got your control buttons, so no one's standing on them. You do have to knock down the chain, and then we've got a snubber, which we'll talk about, and the red bucket sitting on the left.
Yeah, you can see the snubber on the cleat on the top of the Slow Franz windlass, and the red bucket is for the snubber lines. It's a good setup that San Juan Sailing has come up with. So there are 4 manufacturers in the world that make stainless steel options for their windlasses. You pay a little bit extra, but it's a way, way better deal in terms of preventing corrosion. This is a highly intense corrosion environment. So Lewmar, Low France, Maxwell, and Lighthouse. We're huge fans of Maxwell, not just because they're made in New Zealand or Australia?
New Zealand.
New Zealand. Oh, okay. Not just because they're made in New Zealand, where Amanda comes from, but because of the design. They are brilliant. They're brilliantly designed. We replaced 3 Low France windlasses, and then we switched to Maxwell, and big difference. The ideal situation is to have the motor and the wires and the transmission below decks in a dry place, not in the anchor locker, because the anchor locker is never gasketed and it always has lots of mud and salt water coming in it. And this is on Mahina Tiari. We're just getting ready to replace the Low Franz aluminum windlass for the 3rd time. Paying extra to have remote cockpit control buttons at the helm is a brilliant idea if you're sailing 2 up. If you have a big crew, it's one thing, but it's great if you can be lowering or retrieving the anchor if necessary without going to the bow. And this is not a nice job, something you need to do every year, and that is take apart the windlass, clean it, and grease it. You want to mention the laminated card you made?
Yeah, there's a lot of steps involved, a lot of tools that we need. So I did a laminated card of the steps. So I photographed each step and the tools and the amount of time it took, so we can then budget. It is 2 hours to disassemble it, grease it, and make sure we've got the right seal too, so we keep that ahead.
Yeah, if you don't take care of the windlass, it's $4,000, and you'll have to replace it. Chain snubber is important. That's one way to take care of the windlass, taking the loading off the windlass so you don't break the gears in it. We are making an even stretchier snubber by putting a rubber dockline compensator in line with the chain snubber. It just gives more elasticity, less shock loading. So here's our snubber setup: 10 meters of half-inch 3-strand line, dockline compensator, and a Wichard snap hook on the end. Chafe protection. The best chafe protection we found is fire hose, and marine, industrial, commercial marine stores like fishing stores always sell it to use on fish boats, and it's inexpensive, and it just is brilliant for preventing chafe. In this instance, preventing chafe of the snubber against the chain and against the cheeks of the bow roller. This just shows a good blow in the South Pacific off the island of Wallis, and you can see the snubber is really stretching out.
So you want slack in the chain. You don't want the chain at all pulling on your windlass, as John mentioned. Snubber line is cleated off to a strong bow cleat. Pitching, if you've got a catamaran, you'll be using a bridle, or even on a
Pitching
boats.
is just bad in general because it jerks the anchor out. It's just too much shock loading. But you mentioned anchor bridle. Here's a really good one. This is the Mantis pre-made anchor bridle on an island packet. Very strong way. We just use a one-sided, but this is a two-sided one, which is normal on catamarans or on powerboats. Here's the Nordhaven. Mention that.
Sure, this is just a dry mesh bag or laundry bag that you can then feed your line into. But we mentioned that the 3-strand doesn't coil too well, so it will probably come out tangled. But if you're short on space or locker space, you could put your Omega braid in here and it can drain once you've used it.
The Omega braid is so expensive, and we want to take such
Yeah, we
good care that every time we use it, believe it or not, I wash it in the laundry bucket and then drape it over the lifelines and dry it totally dry before I put it in its West Marine duffel bag.
And we stow it down below under
Yeah.
the bunk, so we don't want a stinky, wet, slimy line.
It's big. It's
Yeah.
a duffel bag, and it's heavy. It must weigh easily 10 kilos.
But once we coil our 3-strand and it's figure 8, we then stuff it into a mesh bag and keep it in the anchor locker forward. This is on our friend Andy's boat. So he divided his anchor locker, put a divider between it for his 2 sets of chain, and then just coils his rope on top, ready to go.
All chain on the right, and then the chain and nylon second anchor rode on the left. It's a good setup. Being prepared to dive on the anchor if it gets tangled around something. This is not something we do in Northwest waters. This is off Norfolk Island, where the Pitcairn mutineers were resettled, and the anchor was stuck under a rock. And
Well, also it's to show the dinghy. That's often if we have to retrieve, rather than trying to get the mothership to the actual anchor,
Right.
we'll often take the dinghy,
And-
put out the anchor road, or just knowing
For-
how to handle the chain and the anchor so you're not going to poke a hole in your dinghy, or being able to have a dinghy with an outboard. So we're looking at a bigger boat, but sometimes we need to.
communicating hand signals is great. And second thing is selecting an anchorage. Here is a very challenging anchorage, English Harbor, Antigua. How in the world are you going to have enough swinging space around you? There's just so many boats in such a short area. And there's a lot of coral if you look and see. So this was not our first time, but we haven't been in this anchorage that many times. And so we have Cruising Guide out. We've printed off Google Earth. We have that ready. We have 2 different computers running, 2 different charting systems running.
We've checked the weather, so make sure the wind isn't going to swing around and go blowing into the bay, no matter what bay we're in or what boats are going to be around us. So I'm always conscious of what the weather's doing.
And we've checked the tides.
Oh, yeah.
This is for BC waters, but checking the tides is a really big deal. Some parts of the world, like Scandinavia or the Med, the tidal range is 0 or close to it. But here in coastal Northwest waters, we see 10-meter tides the further north we get.
But you want to calculate how much chain you let out and how
Exactly.
much swinging room you're going to need, and just working out where you are in relationship to what the tide's going to be doing.
I know that as soon as the borders reopen, that many of you, like we, are excited about getting to Alaska, and anchoring there with the tides that are twice what they are in Vancouver is a challenge. What about this?
Ah,
This is one of our students, Gary Hall, on his Allures 45. He's just sailed at 50,000 miles from France to Papua New Guinea to BC. And he loved it because they could dry the boat out. Just crank up the keel and let the tide go out.
you
No
don't worry
worries.
about tide there.
No, you can scrub the bottom.
Well, I'm worried about rocking and rolling at anchorage. You see here that these boats are tucked around the little headland in a bay in the Marquesas. So swells coming in from the ocean, there's no barrier reef. If you anchor right in the middle of the bay, it's going to be rolly. So
Because at night, the wind stops, and instead of coming in from the ocean, the wind comes off the land as the temperature of land decreases. And so usually the land breeze is really light, and so there's not enough wind to stretch the anchor out, and so you just roll back and forth all night. If you're on a catamaran, you don't roll. You're happy then. Well, avoiding kelp, that good luck in Northwest waters. This is actually in Svalbard, above Russia and Norway, and almost every anchorage there had kelp. And we just learned that if we wanted to get a huge tangle of kelp, all we needed to do was to try and set the anchor, put the engine in reverse and set it. And then the next morning we would have maybe as much as 50 kilos of kelp. It would take as
It would
long,
take a lot longer. It would
Yeah,
probably be
take
triple the
half an
time
hour
it
to
takes to bring the
have
anchor
to cut
in,
it off.
cutting it off, using we
So-
bent the boat hook. It was
Kelp is nasty stuff. And kelp also is helpful stuff because it shows you where the rocks are. Almost always where there's kelp, the kelp doesn't attach to sand, doesn't attach to mud, it attaches to rocks. And it's the same whether you're in European waters or in BC, Alaska, Washington waters. Kelp is marking the rocks in the summertime. In the wintertime, the kelp is frequently not there. So it's different.
Most of our sailing's been done in the tropics, so we try and avoid coral, which means getting in the water and sighting the anchorage or positioning where the anchor is going to drop, so we're not damaging coral.
You guys all know that coral takes a long time to grow. It's very brittle, and all it takes is a few cruisers not thinking and destroying the coral. In this instance, this is Palmerston Island. There's nothing but coral, alive or dead. There's absolutely no sand here, and so this is the only option there is. There are some moorings which are very unsafe, but
we just have to make sure we don't drop the anchor into a chasm because the coral has these big rifts coming off the reef. So that was fairly tricky.
Fairly challenging. And this would be a place that would be really nice to have a small scuba tank on board for getting it untangled if the anchor and the chain are in more than 20 or 30 meters. Now, we found an interesting thing in the Mediterranean. There are huge areas of the Med now that are forbidden to anchor in because of what they call seagrass beds. In the Northwest, we call them eelgrass beds, but this is where salmon, all different kinds of fish spawn. And we actually got a seahorse that came up with a chain one place in New Zealand where we were anchored on seagrass, not by choice. And so off Port Townsend, just south of Victoria, there are voluntary no anchor zones. And what the people, the Northwest Straits Foundation, who are organizing this, what they say is you need to anchor in more than 9 meters of water because that depth of water filters the light, and so you won't have eelgrass on the bottom. So just remember that if you anchor 9 meters or deeper water, you shouldn't have an issue with eelgrass. You'll have better holding if there isn't eelgrass, and you won't be destroying the habitat for salmon spawning.
Want to allow for swinging room, realizing that your boat may swing in a different position and direction and speed than your boat. So if you're a big heavy boat, you just want to stay put. A smaller boat may be dancing around the anchorage, so be aware of that.
And a powerboat versus a sailboat, the underbody, a catamaran versus a monohull, these will all be different. Occasionally, if we're coming into a new anchorage that's a little bit tight, we'll ask the boat that is closest to where we're going to anchor, excuse me, how many meters of chain do you have out? That really helps in determining where you should drop your anchor. Courtesy and responsibility. Boy, it would be tough to be courteous here in Croatia unless you went around to the next bay because there's just so many boats there. Very popular place.
Oh, and the Caribbean. So the rule of thumb for chartering is that you need to be in by 4 o'clock so that you're not trying to anchor when it's too late in the evening. Norway, you buddy up to your comrades as you come into an anchorage. Party time, I think, there.
Very little tides, and in many places in Norway and some in Sweden, they have put mountain climbing stakes, pins with little rings into the rocks. And so you just pass a line through or tie a bowline onto the ring on the rock. They frequently use stern anchors in Scandinavia and then just step off the bow ashore onto the rocks. No tide and 24-hour daylight. So it's different. We don't have a stern anchor setup.
All right. How do you anchor? Well, come into the anchorage and we tend to do a 360 survey with the boat. So we're checking the depth, we're checking swinging room, any obstacles. So then come up into the wind.
Slowly.
Drop the anchor. Out goes all the chain, and then let the boat slowly drift back. Sometimes we put it in gear, but generally not.
Generally not.
No.
And so just let the wind and the current bring the boat back. We see so many people, as soon as the anchor hits the bottom, put in reverse with 2,000 RPMs and they go roaring backwards. The anchor is going boing, 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 boing along the bottom, and it never sticks. It's quite amusing, but it's not very good seamanship at all. So go backwards very slowly, and then The British rule, according to Nigel Calder, is a cup of tea. Once you've got the chain out, before you put it in reverse, go below,
Go below.
have a cup of tea,
Yes.
a bicky,
Yeah.
and then come on deck and see what the wind and the current have, where they've oriented the boat, and then start the engine, put it in slow astern, no throttle at all, just slow astern, maybe 800 RPM for a couple minutes, and then very gradually increase revs. Gradual is good, and mind the dinghy. I'm sure none of you have ever backed over the dinghy.
Never.
Never, ever. So this is self-explanatory, 4-1, and that is at high tide, not at low tide, and with chain, and 7-1 with rope. We're usually very conservative, and if there's room, we'll put out more than 4-1, more like 6 or 8-1 with all chain.
Once we're in position and had our cup of tea, we'll look on deck and check that the range is fine with it. So we're looking at a boat that's in the foreground, lining it up.
An object.
An object, yeah. Lining it up with the roof of a house. We'll put in slow RPMs and make sure that that
In
doesn't
reverse.
move in relationship to the roof.
If that relationship is moving, that means that
We're
we
dragging.
we must be dragging.
Time to re-anchor.
It's a really great idea while you are in reverse to have someone up on the bow with their toe on the chain, because if the anchor is skipping along the bottom, you can really tell that through the vibration.
After anchoring, well, we mentioned having that cup of tea. Do we have another one? Or-
Another cup after all done? Well, actually, no.
Oh.
We just go straight down, pull out the paper chart, and
Oh, yeah.
plot the position on it. Paper chart, yes. Paper chart's still important. This is in northern BC waters, somewhere up near Prince Rupert. It's amazing. Now, not in BC and in the States and in Europe, but in the whole rest of the world, pretty much, in much of the world, you plot the GPS position of your anchorage on the chart, and it shows you on a mountain or out in the channel or on the reef. And so what you're doing by plotting the position, so you take the GPS position, put it in the logbook, write the time that you're done anchoring, latitude, longitude down to the 10th, 100th, and thousandths, and then plot that in the chart. What you're doing is just establishing the accuracy of the chart. If it shows that you're out in the channel and not anchored in the bay, you know you can't depend on that chart. Electronic charts are great, but in third world places where you guys want to cruise, like Caribbean and Mexico and Pacific, charts are not accurate. And if we expect the same level of accuracy we have in Northwest waters, we get into dangerous situations. So, and the other thing is plot the position and plot the exit route.
Right.
It might be as simple as just
Yeah.
reversing your GPS waypoints coming into the anchorage to get out, but you need to have a way to get out. You know, when it blows up, it doesn't do that at noontime. It does that at 2 a.m.
Yep.
when it's completely pitch black and raining horizontally. Well, you're not going to do this in British Columbia, but diving the anchor to check it. If you're in warm tropical waters, this is Mia Carlson from 59 North, diving their new Rockna anchor, checking that it's set.
For nighttime, rigging your anchor light, so it could be at the top of the mast, but we often find that it's better to have one lower down if we're in a crowded anchorage or there's boats zipping by or it's an unfamiliar place. We have a blue light that we hook up from the bottom of the boom.
So we just plug it into a cigarette lighter in the cockpit, drape it around the boom once, and it wiggles back and forth because the boom is moving, and you can't miss this. And so there's no chance of a Ponga zooming by and accidentally T-boning us. Set an anchor watch. You know, here Frosty is handling the anchor watch, but if you're concerned about the safety of the anchorage, people say, well, what about setting an anchor watch alarm on your GPS or on your MFD? Forget it. If you need to have an anchor watch, you need somebody in the cockpit reading a book, listening to tunes, watching the depth, watching the radar, and physically standing an anchor watch. It's actually not that onerous. It's kind of fun.
Right, we're going to cover 6 anchoring techniques that we've used worldwide or that are available even here cruising north. Should count how many we've used going up to Alaska and back.
Yeah.
Well, single bow anchor, number 1.
Simple.
Yep.
Oversized anchor.
Yep, mentioned that.
You know, Lynn and Larry Party talk about having a Luke fisherman anchor stowed in the bilge. Forget it. In storm conditions, how are you going to pull that anchor out of the bilge, assemble it, and get it 100 meters out to windward? Not going to happen. Oversized anchor on the bow, being used every day. Minimum 4-1 scope. Oh, whoa.
No. You want a plan of escape.
So Single anchor, this is Svalbard, just 600 miles from the North Pole. Wind is katabatic. It's coming down off the glacier. It's changing around frequently. Single anchor is great. Boat can pivot around or weathercock into the wind.
Plenty of space. Same here in Ireland. We've got Willie Wars coming through the bay, a little bit of a swell coming in from the open ocean. This is just a day stop. I don't think I'd want to spend the night here. If it did,
Unless it was really
we
sad.
would definitely be doing anchor watch if it was. Another day stop. So we've put the anchor down in the sandy spot just forward of the boat and drop back, hanging off the reef here.
With the wind holding us off. Now, 2 anchors are excellent, and our rule on board is if we have forecast or if we're receiving more than 25 knots, second anchor goes out. Not a question. If you have a lightweight boat, say like a J140 that tacks back and forth a lot, second anchor really settles the boat down. If you know the holding ground is poor, or if you want to go on a long hike where you're out of sight of the boat and not worry about the boat, second anchor really doubles your security. So it's 2 anchors off the bow, 45 to 90 degrees. Second anchor, well, if it's a sandy or muddy or smooth bottom, like we have a lot of times in the Northwest, you can simply let out all the chain in the primary, motor slowly forward on the secondary, let it out, and then come back. This is off the island of Moorea, 12 miles west of Tahiti. Frontal passage was forecast. We knew the wind was going to be doing a 360, so we have 2 anchors off the bow here. This is on the island of Mopilia, 200 miles west of Tahiti, and we have a good breeze, 25 knots, reinforced trade winds, and all the both anchors are out here. Setting that second anchor, if there's coral, as there was in the last image there, takes a little bit of help. If you have 2 people on board, it's a lot easier than single-handed. What I've done here is just driven the dinghy underneath the bow. One of our crew in the bow has lowered it down. You can see I've just perched it on the side of the tender, so it's ready to push over, and then the chain is being lowered down into the bottom of the dinghy. I'm simply going to run out with the dinghy, push the anchor over, and then the second anchor is set. And here I am pushing it over. You want to be really careful it doesn't poke the dinghy while it's going over the side.
So this saves us driving the boat, the main boat, away from the anchor that's already set, trying to drop a second anchor and pull back between the two. So we're using the dinghy for that.
It's definitely an instance where having a very stable and strong tender with at least 10 horsepower is helpful. And here we are just evening up the pull, so there's equal pull on the 2 anchors. And we're all set now. The primary anchors to starboard, secondary anchors to port. The pull has been evenly distributed between the 2.
This is an option we also used in the very tight harbor around the island of Fair Isle. So there wasn't much swinging room. We wanted to reduce our swinging room in case the wind shifted. We're also going for a long walk, so we set 2 anchors off the bow.
Now, a lot of the parts of the world, there aren't marinas. And so it's not uncommon to have to drop an anchor and back up to either a beach, a bulkhead, or a dock. This definitely takes practice. And if you have a bow thruster, it makes it a lot easier. You notice that second anchor is set out at an angle, and that's in case the wind is not coming straight into the bay. Greece is a great example. And in a fair number of harbors in the Med, you'll find that there are mooring lines that you don't necessarily see, but they're underneath the water and tied to a ring on the bulkhead. And so you pick up with a boat hook, pull in that tag line, and that brings a mooring line to you. In this instance, I think the boats are actually anchored, and it's quite a tangle. And you can believe in the morning when people get ready to go, they accidentally pick up each other's anchors, and you definitely want to be on board when people are getting ready to leave. This is our home port of Rarotonga in the Cook Islands, and I think our record is 9 lines and 3 anchors out. It's a very challenging harbor, to say the least, and it takes several hours, a couple people working several hours to get secure here. And then the wind changes and it's all different. We found a little trick that works great in the Caribbean, in bays where a lot of charter boats tend to come and congregate. This is
Peter Island?
Peter Island.
Yep.
And what's the name of the bay?
Is it Peterman Bay?
No, that's in Antarctica. No,
Oh,
that's
is
in, yeah.
Too many
Anyway,
Peters. Peter
this is-
Piper picked a pepper pepper. All right.
This is Peter Island, just across from
This
Roguetown,
is the bay
Tortola.
you go to on your first night
First
of charter
night
from
out.
the BVI. Straight across, anchored
So
out,
about 3:30, there's always a bunch of charter boats
whizzing around.
whizzing around, bumping into each other nearly. And so what we do to stay out of their way is we drop the main anchor way out and let out 70 meters of chain back as close as we can to the trees. Take the dinghy and take our long line ashore, tie it around the tree, and then just pull ourselves back until the rudder is just half a meter above the water.
Yeah, and then a big charter cat comes and anchors beside us and runs its generator all night.
Oh,
And-
well.
Oh well, life in the
But-
BVS.
And the little orange thing is to
Oh,
show
yeah,
that
that's-
we've put a float to mark where the anchor is. And then if a new charter comes in and starts to try and tie up to it or try to anchor right next to it, we say, excuse us, that's where our anchor is. They say, wow, sure, a long way out here. We said, yeah, we're really conservative. Here's a great tip from New Zealand.
Yeah, our friends circumnavigated the South Island of New Zealand, Jim and Katie, and instead of launching the dinghy to take a line ashore, they just had a inflatable stand-up kayak. I guess it's a kayak
Yeah, it's just a
that Katie
really-
would just toss in the water, paddle out,
no motor.
yeah, put a line around the tree, paddle back.
These are our friends on KaiQuest, Sarah
I think
and,
that's Andy.
oh, is this Andy Cross?
Yeah, Andy Cross.
Oh, this is Andy
Yeah.
Cross, 48 North
Editor.
editor.
Yeah.
Anchoring in Desolation Sound, that may be Prito Haven, not sure, but what a gorgeous, look how clean that water is. And you know that gets warm there in the summer. And so what Andy's done is, instead of tying the line to the tree, he's just run it around the tree, goes to the mooring cleats on either side of the stern. And that's really nice because if the wind changes or when he gets ready to go in the morning, he doesn't have to launch the dinghy, just unties it on one side, pulls the line through, and away he goes. Oh my goodness, that looks
Oh
like
yeah,
a
and if
black,
there's a bear on the beach, you don't have to go mess with the bear to get
it's
your
like a
line.
little black bear there.
Oh.
You wouldn't want to have to go there. So we've enjoyed cruising Antarctica. We've been frozen in a couple times there. And in this instance, we use no anchor. You can see the vintage CQR anchor is perched on the bow, not used at all. And we've just used floating lines and tied ourselves off in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 directions. This is actually safer than anchored in some instances because you don't have to worry about icebergs coming in and sitting on top of your anchor and preventing you from leaving. It was quite fun. Now, the Bahamian mooring was invented for reversing tidal currents. And this is our colleague Pete McGonigal with his 50-foot Perry Charlotte in the Bahamas. And where you have a tidal current reversing every 6 hours, if you have just one anchor, you're going to pull it out when the tide reverses. We used the same technique on the island of San Miguel in the Azores. Wasn't enough room to swing inside this tiny harbor, so we put 2 anchors out and the boat just pivoted there. It worked very well. Also off the Great Barrier Reef, works there. Now, bow and stern anchoring is great if you have the swell coming from a different direction than the wind. And we'll show you some instances of that. Here's an instance in Maine.
This is in Mexico, once again with Andy. He's actually picked up a mooring buoy, and they request that you also pick one up in the stern to keep your bow into the swell. So we mentioned that earlier. Stops you from rolling sideways in the waves.
This was on the island of Tubuai, 350 miles south of Tahiti. And here I have
This is more of a storm, though, isn't it? But
Yeah,
you
this
put
is
out
a
as many
storm.
things as you can.
yeah, tie it in many directions, be creative. Now, beam anchoring is something you may have never heard of, but if you are ever getting pushed hard against a dock, or if there are rats or small inquisitive children on the dock, sometimes putting an anchor off the beam, off your midship mooring cleat, and holding the boat off the dock can be really prudent and work very well. Here's an instance. Look, this boat needs to put a beam anchor out because they're pinned on the dock. If you start to drag anchor, you'll know because the bow will blow off and the boat will start sliding sideways. This is an instance where a boat from Vancouver, the wind changed direction 180 degrees, frontal passage in the South Pacific. The chain wrapped around a coral head and snapped, and then they ended up driving around in circles in a dark and 30-knot squall until they ran into something and sunk the boat in shallow water. Anchor retrieval. Here's the ideal, keeping the boat over the bow,
Keeping the bow
keeping
over
the bow
boat.
over
Keeping
the
bow-
anchor.
over the anchor.
This is Amanda's dad in Vanuatu.
So he's driving the boat forward. You don't want to be pulling all the might and main, trying to pull your anchor up out of the water. You want to get the boat over, try and break it out when you can, and then bring in the chain.
Watching for coral. So the reason we have crew standing in the granny bars is they can see the coral a lot better. The reason we have Amanda in the water with her seal mask on is she could visually see the coral and say, okay, you're going to have to go to starboard because the chain is wrapped around the coral. That really works well. Well, what really matters is keeping it simple.
Yep.
Forget swivels.
Yeah.
Don't need them. Absolutely unnecessary. Riding sail. Well, if you have a really lightweight boat like this Swedish boat that tends to tack back and forth, it can be helpful, but most boats no. Tandem anchoring, made famous by Earl Hines in his anchoring book, forget it. Better to have 2 anchors out than 2 anchors on one road. Better to have 2 anchors on separate roads because you have protection from different directions then, and it's a whole lot easier to retrieve.
Anchor kill it. So this is a weight that you drop down your main anchor line to make it sink to the bottom or make your anchor seem heavier. That seems really confusing to me.
Use a bigger anchor.
What? Yeah, get that big anchor.
So the key points,
Yep.
arrive with plenty of time.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
the mooring says they want you to have the anchor down by 4 o'clock. Brilliant idea. Choose your spot carefully, let out tons of scope, be ready to move anytime, day or night, if you need to. Wow, there we go. So we offer sail training in the Pacific Northwest aboard the Garcia Exploration 45, in Scotland starting in April next year, in Alaska next June. And I help people find their ideal cruising boat. I do boat purchase consultation with unlimited time frame. And then we have our brand new virtual offshore cruising seminar. It's the 174th offshore cruising seminar, but the first virtual one. And then we have books. How did I do?
You did really well. You did all the talking.
Oh,
I think you had too
no.
many crunchy mouths. But we're happy to answer questions. You can email us, sailing@mahina.com. There's lots of information on our website. We mentioned the forms. So there's the anchoring handout that you can download and go through. And you can watch this show as many times as you like in the next few months. So thank you, Vancouver Boat Show.
And our storm survival tactic is tomorrow at 3:30.
Right.
And
And
diesel
who's doing
engine.
diesel? Am I
You're
doing
gonna do
it?
it,
Am
yeah.
I going to do it? Okay.
Yeah. Amanda's
I'm
gonna-
doing diesels on Saturday. So
I
here we
won't
go.
talk too much.
Oh, no, I get to do all the talking.
You get to do
then.
all the talking.
Great.
Yeah. In fact, tomorrow you can do a lot of talking.
No,
No.
no. We'll answer questions. I'll answer questions now.
Okay, so Maureen,
Yes.
take it away.
Okay. So our first question is from David. He asks, why stainless shackles on galvanized chain/anchor?
The reason to have stainless steel shackles is because they're stronger, they don't rust, and those Wishard shackles have, every 90 degrees, have a detent where the pin locks in. You don't have to worry about dissimilar metals, corrosion issues, because they're not in the water long enough. But the Wishard stainless shackles are just absolutely the best. Any other questions?
Yeah, so there isn't another question right now, but please feel free to add them to the Q&A box. Let's see here.
Maureen, do you think they've all fallen asleep? We
I
had lots
don't
of questions
think
last
so.
night.
I
Maybe
know.
Was it- Maybe this.
We
they know-
answered them all?
I don't know.
We have a question from Timothy. He
Yes.
asks, White Bay or Peter Island? White Bay on Peter Island? I don't know if that was.
What is that,
It-
Bay?
Yeah,
Come on, you charterers, help us out. We haven't been there for so long. We're
been a few years.
COVID
it
stuck.
could be, but Peter Island. Okay, why no swivel? Yeah, no swivel because the practical sailor tests show that if the swivel gets 90-degree pull, it can break, and it's just not necessary. There's absolutely no reason to have a swivel. You say, yes, the chain has some tension in it. True, but when you're bringing up the anchor, if you wait for about 2 seconds, it just unspins before you pull it over and lock it into the bow rollers. Have you tried the Ultra Anchor? Hey, weren't you watching? That's what we were raving about, the stainless steel Ultra Anchor. Yeah, it's brilliant. I'm a new sailor. Can you estimate what scope boats may have out? Oh, how can you can you estimate how much scope people have out if there's no one on board? No, absolutely
No.
not. But look carefully and see if there's chain or nylon road going over the bow. If there's chain, you know the boat's not going to swing in nearly as wide arc as if there's chain. It's not going to swing in as wide of arc as if you just see nylon road going over the bow roller. Any other questions?
A question here, tips,
Oh, here we go.
best brand, oh, okay.
Please explain how to deploy and manage an anchor marker buoy without tangling it in the road. Well, let's see. I think saying your Hail Marys might help. No, what we do is we just before the anchor goes, we look at the depth sounder and then tie light nylon cord, actually flag halyard line, to the shank of the anchor, to the float. Our float is just an orange juice jug, and then chuck it over. And then if you get all situated and go in the dinghy and you see there's a lot of slack at high water, just pull in some line and then take a hitch in it, and that works well. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's just to give someone an idea. Do you have any tips on how to gauge where to drop the anchor in a busy anchorage? Oh, well, yes, actually I do. One thing to remember is that by the time the anchor actually touches the bottom and engages, you're going to be further back and closer to the boat astern than you anticipated. So always start out further upwind than you think you need to, anticipating that it's going to take a little while for the anchor to engage. Vulcan anchor opinion. I think the Vulcan anchor is great. It's a knockoff of the Ultra. Very, very similar, good anchor. Ultra Anchor sells their beautiful anchor with a swivel, and they insist you should buy it and use it. Yeah,
we did.
They do. Yeah, we have it, but do we think it's necessary? Nah. Heather Sloat. Do Rocknas apparently end up lying on their side on the bottom? Well, Heather, the whole point of that goofy roll bar is so that it will not land on its side, that will help engage it. Ultra has a completely different deal. The anchor is hollow, the shank of the anchor is hollow, and the bottom has a lead ballast in it. And so you can't make it land on its side. It always lands with the point down. It's just a really good idea. Have you set your itinerary for 2022? That's actually...
He's going to put it on the website tomorrow. That's Scotland
that is
and Alaska.
Right here.
23, we're still working on it.
2022 schedules right here. I was supposed to do that today, but somebody was buying our boat today, and so that took up the whole time. But yes, we'll be in Scotland with 4 expeditions in late April and May. We're flying from Scotland then to Ketchikan, 2 9-day trips, one from Ketchikan to Port Hardy, north end of Vancouver Island, then down the wild outside coast of Vancouver.
You told them that already.
Oh, yeah. Well,
it's going to be up on the website, or email us and
It'll be up. I got to get it up. When you do slowly back up on your anchor to set it, what RPM do you recommend as the max? 1500. Going all the way up to full wide open throttle is not necessary. More important is just to do it slowly and for more period of time. We'll sit there at 12 or 1500 RPM for 2 or 3 minutes, just watching the depth, taking bearings on shore. Longer is better than short and fast in reverse. Denise says it's important to mention that when tying ashore with a continuous line around a tree and back to the boat, it's important to mention that when tying ashore with a continuous line around the tree and back to the boat, when retrieving, avoid tension on the line to limit damage to the tree. Thank you very much, Denise. That's a great idea. Mike O'Leary says, you set a single anchor, all good. Then the wind or tide swings you 180 degrees or 360 degrees. Are we depending on the anchor resetting itself? Yeah, obviously. I've had the chain wrap around the top of a Danforth and snag it badly for recovering. Mike, believe me, you're not the only one. Danforth anchor does very poorly at resetting with a wind shift. And that's why an anchor like the Rockna actually doesn't do too well in the practical sailor test with a 180 shift. Tends to pull itself out. The Ultra is the Ultra for that. It tends to do incredibly well with a 360 or 180 degree shift. Actually, the Delta does well with a 180 shift as well. Anonymous attendee. Great presentation. Thank you. Well,
Thank you,
listen,
Anonymous.
listen, anonymous attendee. Maureen's going to tell you at the end of this that
It's a
you have
survey.
the ability to tell Vancouver Boat Show what you thought of this seminar. If you want us back next year with new shows, more interesting stuff, tell them we did a really good job, please.
This disappears in like 3 minutes.
Any other questions? That's it?
That's it.
Wow. Wow. Usually we're right up against the end. So, well, if you guys think of any more questions in the next couple
Put them in the
minutes.
chat because we'll be monitoring the chat the next couple of days. So
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There's a chat session?
There's a chat session. Yeah.
like
Main
with
chat
Toronto.
session on the page. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Oh, do you want to give a shout out to any seminars coming up?
We did.
Does Jane Finn have another sail
Oh,
repair
I
one
would give
coming?
a shout out to James if you're a sewer and want to sew your own anchor bags and ditty bags.
Repair your sails?
Yes, Jane Finn's sewing seminar was excellent. So I sat and thoroughly enjoyed that.
Oh, that's right. It's already happened, but they can download
You
it
can
for the next.
No, you can't. You can watch it
you
later
can-
on.
I mean, you can watch
Yeah.
it later
and
on.
then the Currys. I always like the Currys because
So
they're doing Mexico and
Sarah Curry and Will Curry, they have
Mhm.
the cute two
twins.
twin boys. They just flew back to Vancouver from Mexico, and they have, I think, another one tonight and tomorrow.
All right, they're not on their boat, are they? Oh, yeah.
They just had to leave it in a rush.
I know.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
wow.
too
They're
bad, but
very
they're
informative
really
seminars.
they do a great job.
Guys, I see one more question here.
Ooh.
Can floating lines also be used for towing?
Oh, we need to scroll down. Oh,
Ooh, there we go.
okay.
We're just looking
Can
at
you
the
just
top of
pull
our
it down?
screen. I'll pull it down while you
okay.
answer the question. Floating line.
Can
question.
floating line also be used for
No.
towing? Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry, we missed.
enjoy
No, you've
towing.
gone to. Oh shoot, we missed a whole bunch of questions because we weren't. Okay, can floating line be used for towing? Yeah, but floating line has very little elasticity, so it does not make good tow line. Floating line is great in areas of large tidal fluctuations like Alaska or Antarctica.
Let out more scope if you're dragging. Yes.
For sure. Okay, keep going down. I have 300 feet of 3/8 inch galvanized chain on my Scepter 43, but found that it rusted quite badly. Is it? Yeah, chain rusts. Yes. What's likely the cause other than poorly galvanized chain? So, who was asking that? Is that Tim?
I
Can't
don't know.
quite see it. But anyway,
Quality of chain.
quality of chain. Tim Seymour. Tim, the cheapest chain you can buy is made from China, and it's crap. We have had friends lose their boats because of brand new Chinese chain failing. The best quality chain you can get is North American. ACCO, American Chain Company, or Campbell are two top US chain manufacturers. I'm not sure who makes chain in Canada, but I'm sure that Canadian chain is going to be way better than Chinese. The other problem with the Chinese chain is the quality of the galvanizing frequently is far inferior, and so it starts rusting right away, even though it hasn't come in contact and abrasion with coral or rock. Will your roads get tangled if you have a wind change when you have two anchors out in a V? Yes, they will. And so it's actually very easy. What you do is take the nylon road, not the chain, figure eight it and secure it, and then just uncleat it and just pass it. It's just kind of a little bit of gymnastics involved, but just unwrap it around the chain road and then bring it back on the bow and cleat it off. It sounds complicated. It's not. It's really easy to solve that issue. Using an oversized anchor, will this be a problem with two bow anchors, too much weight? Yeah, so too much weight on the bow is an issue. And if you have a boat that's fairly lightweight and quite fine in the bow, meaning a sharp, narrow entry versus an island packet with a lot more buoyancy up forward, you won't be able to put 80 meters of chain and two oversized anchors. You may have to just do a single anchor. So one of the points that I go with my clients over when they're in the boat purchase consultation is, will the boat handle sufficient anchor weight up forward? Now we're just about done. Last question. You advise dropping all chain at the same time as anchoring before drifting back? No, we advise, Heather, dropping the anchor to the bottom, letting the boat drift back with the wind or the current, and paying out the chain. What you don't want to do is dump 50 meters of chain on top of the anchor and then pull the anchor up, have it tangled on that. If equipped with radar when mooring, you can use it to measure the distance off to other boats and shore. Yes, radar is a great tool for not only anchoring, but most importantly for standing anchor watch to see if you're dragging in relationship to the shore or the vessels around you. Okay, Maureen, thank you so much. Vancouver Boat Show, thanks so much. We look forward to seeing you guys tomorrow night for Storm Tactics. Tomorrow afternoon at 3:30. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, John and Amanda. And thank you for joining us today. We are interested in your feedback, as John mentioned, either on this seminar or if you have ideas on topics that you would like us to cover in the future. Simply click on the Evaluate tab located just above the seminar description and complete the form. After the show, all attendees will also receive a post-show survey. Be sure to check out all the features at the Vancouver International Boat Show Virtual. If you have a question, check out our info booth. Have a great time at the boat show, and thanks all.
Hope to see you next year at the Vancouver show for real.
Yay, aloha. Anchor safe now.